Good evening, everyone. This is John Morris. Excited to have you here for a discussion that I hope will be a two-way one. Really want to go through the notice of proposed rulemaking from the Department of Transportation on the experience of wheelchair users in air travel. I really want to get your input and answers to these questions. It's going to be very important for the comments that I submit to the Department of Transportation on behalf of myself and all of you. We've had a lot of registrations come in, but I've received many emails from folks who won't be able to attend. So this will be recorded and published onto the website so that others will have an opportunity to listen into the conversation that we've had today and also to share their own comments after the fact. All right, well, let's get started. Obviously, I'm assuming that the majority of you have read my primer on the topic of the notice of proposed rulemaking. I think that this one is really important because it's potentially the last one that we'll see from this administration, whether President Biden is reelected or not. There's been a lot of action around regulation of accessibility in air travel over the last few years. And I'm just not really sure, what more is in the pipeline, just based on what I'm hearing from folks at the Department of Transportation and other advocates. I think a lot of the big things that were being talked about that include accessible bathrooms, and of course the topics included in this proposed rulemaking, single aisle accessible or so-called accessible lavatories, have all been hit. And so yeah, I'm really concerned that this might be our last opportunity for the foreseeable future to put forth some comments from the public about what we really need to see to advance accessibility in air transportation. So I'd like to go through the recommendations, and each of these, there are 9 key areas that I outlined in the article. The 9th one, for the purpose of time, there's really not much to discuss there. That was to bring the more robust onboard wheelchairs into wide-body aircraft. I suspect that that's going to be done. Didn't really see much in the way of discussion possibility around that particular proposal, but the other 8 are certainly ripe for our commentary and a conversation about what we would really like to see as these regulations actually come together into a final rule. So let's get started here. The first of the proposed rules was to establish a passenger right to safe and dignified assistance. And so the way that I'm going to be going through each of these is discussing either the reason for the rulemaking or the actual rule, and then the questions that the Department of Transportation has asked the public to contribute their input on. And I'd like to discuss these questions as we go through it. So for this one, the reason for the rulemaking was that the DOT has received a lot of commentary from the public and advocacy organizations suggesting that the assistance services that are being offered are not protecting the safety of travelers and are oftentimes undignified. And I think that this last point here, that complaints alleging undignified assistance, such as being lifted improperly in a way that would cause passengers' pants to slide off in front of other passengers and resulting in embarrassment, is really critical. I think about some of my travel experiences, and so often, I try to avail myself of pre-boarding every time I'm able. Um, and and oftentimes what happens is I end up going down the jet bridge. And then before I've even transferred into the aisle chair, there's a line of passengers waiting in the jet bridge, watching me transfer. And, for some of my friends who need to be lifted from their wheelchair into the aisle chair, I think that's really problematic um, and certainly embarrassing. I've also had experiences where I get off of the airplane because it's taken the airline some time to return my wheelchair, which is a topic we'll get into in a little bit. And there's a line of passengers waiting to board the airplane for its next flight. None of this should be allowed, so that will definitely be in my commentary, but I would like to take a look at the two questions that they've given us here that I think are really important to discuss, because this particular rule, there are really no meat on these bones, in the sense that they're requiring airlines to treat passengers with dignity and respect and to ensure their safety. But what do these terms actually mean? And so I think the first question of, are the terms safe and dignified easily understood by carriers, that's the airlines, and by the public, that's us, the travelers? Are those terms easily understood? And I don't think that they are. And the second question, are there any other specific practices or procedures that the department should require or prohibit to safeguard passengers' dignity and their safety? And so I'd really like to dig into these and get some input from folks here in the room. What does a safe and dignified assistance mean to you, and what are your expectations when you're boarding a flight, getting off a flight, in the course of a flight, being pushed through the airport terminal in an airport wheelchair? What are your expectations, and what do you think that safe and dignified should mean? Would anyone out there like to? You can unmute yourself and contribute. I'm seeing some chat comments here in the chat, but would love to get some folks on.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for this forum. I think it breaks down to about four transfers, four fireman's carries, where you're getting put from your wheelchair, fireman's carry, into an aisle chair, from the aisle chair into the aircraft seat, back from the aircraft seat into the aisle chair, and then back into the wheelchair. So you have, it's very, very stressful, and you have people that are unfamiliar with transfers. You got the pressure of the time constraints getting on and off the aircraft. I had an hour delay on my flight from Albany to Denver, the aircraft, because they couldn't fit my chair in. And then at the end of the hour, they came in and said, do you want to get off the airplane now, or do you want to wait 2 hours and get your wheelchair when you arrive in Denver? And then when I arrived in Denver late at night, the chair wasn't there. Didn't come till next day. It went to Atlanta. And there's a lot more than that, but I think what you're saying here, the technology. I got one question for you.
Sure.
Have you heard of the Eagle lifter? It uses a sling to get you in and out of the aircraft. It cuts down the transfers from 4 to 2. I just wondered if something like that wasn't being used across the United States regularly.
And David, I recall getting your email earlier today. I'm not sure if you're also the person who sent me some communication with an airline in which you were recommending the Eagle lifter, or asking if you could bring it along with you.
I wasn't asking about the Eagle lifter. I asked about the Eagle lifter as a possibility, but I thought that there was other technology as well. Actually, I thought there was like many different ways to make improvements, when, we're working together in positive ways, um, but I interrupted you, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think that the Eagle Lifter is available now in the majority of airports in the United Kingdom and at least several airports in Australia. The company that produces that product, I believe they're called Haycomp, and they are based in Australia, as I understand. I was first made aware of the Eagle Lifter, which essentially is, um, you can, there's an article about it on the website. So if you just type in Eagle Lift in the search box, it should pop up in those
Well,
results.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
the big distinction is between, using a sling scenario where, and with the lift, so you would cut it to two transfers from four. And then it would not be manual, it would be, based on the lift scenario. Um, so
yeah,
it, it's,
and so I'm just gonna pull up a photo of the Eagle Lift.
and I just, by mentioning this, I just want to make clear that, I understand people really want to be able to board the aircraft in their chairs. And that's what, ultimately we want to make happen. And I'd love to see that happen as soon as possible, the best way it can happen. I'm not advocating against any measures. I had a couple of ideas about just making, a few, interim steps to make things a little bit more positive.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, from my perspective, obviously, we certainly want to get a wheelchair space on the airplane. There's a lot of work being done about that. But in the meantime, my perspective is that the status quo is just not acceptable. And so we need to improve the experience today while we await a wheelchair space to actually appear on the aircraft. And so,
There's a beautiful article in the New York Times that elaborates the status quo and gives a picture, a blow-by-blow status of transfers for people that are non-ambulatory. And if you get a chance to see the article, it's amazing. The photos are amazing.
yeah, I believe that article was uh, uh, was with a gentleman who works with the Paralyzed Veterans of America. Um, and yeah, I certainly recall that. But yeah, I can't pull up the Eagle Lifter right here, but I'll certainly include that in the notes when I publish the video of this. Essentially, it's really like a Hoyer lift that's designed to go down the aisle of the aircraft and put you into the seat. So basically, you get lifted up on a sling, folks roll you onto the aircraft and to your seat, and then you get lowered down into the seat. It's much safer than being physically lifted. And like David was saying, as you got to get lifted once to get into the aisle chair, then from the aisle chair into the seat. So that's two as you're getting on the airplane, and then another two occasions getting off the airplane. And if you've got a connecting flight or two, depending on how far or where you're traveling, we could be talking about 8 to 12 physical lifts and transfers, and each of those is an opportunity to be injured, dropped. And so, yeah, it's really terrible. I do think that even in a physical lifting scenario, if we're not able to mandate the Eagle Lift, which I certainly would suggest doing so, making that available to passengers on every flight where it's possible in the United States. I think that is an entirely reasonable request. Um, but if that ultimately doesn't get regulated, I think we can still do better in the process of actually lifting people. There maybe should be a sling available rather than lifting, people from underneath their arms. and underneath their legs. And so that's certainly something that I'm planning to recommend. I encourage you to do that as well. There's one thing I'll say. I am going to publish the comments that I'm sending to the DOT probably in another week or two for all of these questions that we're going to discuss today. But I don't want you to copy them and send them in, because if you copy them, they'll be treated as one comment. So it's important that you put things in your own words and share from your own experience in commenting on these and other questions. I'd also encourage you to try to focus on the questions that the DOT is asking. There are a lot of things that we'd like to see regulated that just aren't going to be covered in this rulemaking. The notice of proposed rulemaking sort of sets the window for regulation. It lays out, what the DOT is considering in the areas that they're considering regulating. So, it's probably not the time to be commenting about lavatory design, as as frustrated as I am with where we're at on that and what we ultimately got from the DOT. It's important to focus on these questions because these are the answers they're looking for from the public to inform how they craft the final regulations. Are there any other comments on what safety and dignified assistance means to you? Otherwise, we'll move on to the second point.
John, if I may, this is Debbie Kasunik in Ohio. The terms safe and dignified are sort of overused. And if the government could consider something that says the same thing, but without that exact terminology. In other words, a system which maintains the dignity of the passenger and the passenger's safety. Do you see what I'm saying? If they just put in safe and dignified, we've all heard that 1,000 times. What does that really mean?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's really what they're getting at. There is some confusion there, and I think the DOT recognizes that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the concerns that I have about these sort of broad statements that don't actually have any real meaning to them, or at least easily discernible meaning, is that it then becomes very difficult to hold an airline accountable for having failed to deliver what we're talking about.
That's very true.
The airline could say, well, the passenger was alive when they got off the plane, so it was a safe assistance service that we provided. And so I do definitely think that there needs to be more specificity in what we're actually regulating. And I encourage everyone to not only say that this needs to be more specific, but in the public comments that I hope you will submit to the DOT, you'll say exactly what that means. I feel we've long had a regulation about wheelchairs being returned in the same condition they were handed over. And I think passengers should end up at their destination in the same condition in which they arrived at the airport. So, I certainly think more specificity here is important.
Thanks, John.
I see that Pamela has her hand raised. You're welcome to come into the conversation.
Hi, John. I wonder if we should ask them to, if you think it's a good idea to ask them to make sure that they listen to the passenger and what the passenger's needs are. I mean, is the airlines going to think that we're going to overstep their, whatever they've trained them to do if they allow us to do that? I mean, so often when I'm lifted on and off, people just, do what they were trained to do, and they don't even listen to me if I say, excuse me, don't lift my leg there, or whatever it is that I'm saying. They don't hear me at all. I mean, could we put that, a little bit of that into what we mean by safe and dignified?
Absolutely. I think following the instructions of the passenger is very important.
Or at
I've
least
had a
listening to them and if it's something they can't do, they could tell us, look, we're not allowed to do that, whatever it is, but just have a little bit of a conversation.
right, right. No, I entirely agree. I think that really if it's not already should be the first point of training in that, you know, we've heard it many times before that the person with a disability is the only expert on their own disability and their experience and what their needs are. And that certainly needs to be taken into account in the delivery of services. And it's not just listening, but following through with what you've been told. I think that's definitely very critical.
John, do you know who's making these new rules, or sorry, who is making up the training program? Do you know who's involved?
So, there is a point on training, and I can certainly share a lot. I'd like to save that part of the conversation, the specific training itself, for when we get
Okay.
to that point later in the conversation. But definitely think improvements are needed in training. I saw Mark had his hand raised. Did you still want to say something?
Actually, it's Kimberly, Mark's wife. Hi,
Hi,
John.
Kimberly.
Um, in terms of safe, I mean, we think it should be professionally trained and certified and done on a continuous basis, not like you've been trained once and you've been doing this for 5 years now and you were only trained once. It should be like a driver's license or anything else, where you should have to have a recertification to make sure that you're not getting bad habits and not realizing it because it's what you've been doing. And yes, the dignified thing should be, as the last person said, you should ask the person that's being transferred how they prefer to be transferred and actually listen to them. One of the things that makes Mark and I so frustrated is when Mark will ask a question and they'll look to me and answer. They don't actually look at Mark and answer, and they'll ask me a question about how Mark is feeling. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. So that was kind of what we'd want to say. Mark's sitting behind me, so watching, but so he can't get up to the microphone on the computer. But
Oh, no worries. Well, thank you for that. And I certainly agree. I think recognizing the personhood and presence of the passengers that are in front of you is really important. I've maybe written somewhere before that when I travel with other people, I tell them not to check in with me because if we go up to the ticket counter together, even though I'm the frequent traveler, they're not going to say anything to me. They'll say, well, what does he need? How can we
right,
assist him? And you know, I think that that is a societal challenge, but I certainly hope that it can be trained out of us in understanding that, these maybe someone hasn't spoken to someone like me before. I look different than a lot of people that are around me in the public square, but I'm equally competent and capable of speaking for myself. And
absolutely.
so that's important to put in the minds of the people, particularly who are delivering this type of assistance.
Right. So if it was written down, it might be more helpful.
Here's a very good question in the chat from JJ, and it's listening to the disabled passenger requesting assistance is important, but what if it's a newly disabled passenger? And I really wish that I hadn't waited so long to start this website after I had my, first year of travel with a disability. I try to recall what things were like back then. And I remember on my first trips as a wheelchair user, my assistance needs were different because my disability was impacting me in ways that are different from the way it's impacting me today. I was actually had a more difficult time. I was weaker. I was not long out of the hospital. I needed to be lifted from my wheelchair into the seat. And and I think I was also less, and this might be what JJ is getting to. I was also less confident in speaking for myself because I certainly felt unseen. I wasn't entirely sure what I needed. If you're a new traveler with a disability, you know, we all have that first experience of how is this supposed to work? And then you think that maybe the way things are going are how things are supposed to be. But I was so frustrated early on with the way things were going and saying, surely this is not how people should be treated. Surely we can do better than this. That I started to ask those questions, and certainly think that there needs to be more communication in the way of this is how this is the service that we're able to provide. How, obviously, how can we best assist you? But if you're, unfamiliar with how this works, do you have any questions? Can we answer them? That's something that I don't hear a lot. A lot of times people will say, how can we best assist you? And that's great. But it might be nice to follow that up with, and do you have any questions? Not sure if that's what JJ was talking about, but important nonetheless. Okay, I'm going to move to the second point just so we can move this along. Need to close out of some windows here to make sure. Oh, I moved to 3. Okay. The second point here is the right to promptness in the delivery of service to help you on and off the plane, and then also if you have a connecting flight to the next gate and the next airplane. What the DOT is proposing is that the assistance team should be there waiting to get you off no later than as soon as the other passengers who haven't requested assistance have gotten off the airplane. Oftentimes, I'm sure it's true for many of you, I'll be waiting there, everyone's off the plane, and I'm just sitting there with the flight attendants like, well, when are people going to show up to help me off and return my wheelchair? So I think certainly that's a valuable point to be specific about when folks should be there to assist. The second question here, or the second point, states that the passenger's personal wheelchair or scooter, I cut that out of the commentary here, must be ready and available as close as possible to the door of the aircraft to the maximum extent possible. One thing I'll say on this last point, because it's something that really frustrates me, I want my wheelchair returned in the jet bridge as close to the door as possible. And that's, partly because of going back to that sort of dignity point. I don't want to be transferring into the wheelchair in front of everyone in the airport terminal. I want the time and the safe environment to be able to get my wheelchair put back together the way it's supposed to be, an opportunity to inspect it, to make sure that it's okay, free of the chaos of the airport terminal and the prying eyes of all those who are waiting there for their flight. But oftentimes, and this is true particularly when I'm traveling back into the United States, I'll hear from airline staff that, no, you've got to collect it at baggage claim or at customs. We can't bring it to you. And I guess what I will say is that I've never been to an airport anywhere in the world where it's not possible to return the wheelchair to the door of the aircraft. So it's an absolute lie if they tell you that. If you can roll me to my wheelchair, you can roll your wheelchair to me. So unless we're climbing staircases and dragging me up steps or whatever, it's possible to get the wheelchair back to people. So, maximum extent possible, it gets the point across. but I'd like some clarity, I think, on, how quickly should wheelchairs be returned? Generally, based on all the complaints I've submitted to the DOT over the years, anything over 30 minutes has always been ruled a violation. I've never had a DOT complaint sent back to me, and they said this wasn't a violation. There was one occasion where there was a half violation. I didn't realize that a plane that I was on that didn't have an accessible lavatory was grandfathered in, but there were other violations that I was reporting at the same time, and all of those cleared. So I still consider myself to have 100% record. If I filed something with the DOT, I've done so thoughtfully. And all of my complaints have been upheld as having been, bona fide violations. And I think that, more than 30 minutes to get your wheelchair back, that there's no reason that it should take that long anyway. Teams that are on top of these things have been able to get my wheelchair back in as little as 5 minutes. So, I don't think that there are 25 minutes of other factors that should delay a return by that much. But let's take a look at these questions. It sort of goes to this point. What should the DOT's definition of promptly be? And then also a question they're asking is, if you're semi-ambulatory, meaning, you're able to walk off the airplane under, your own power, a short distance, should that assistance be available to you immediately upon you getting off the airplane, whenever that may be? If you're in the front of the airplane, you could be the first person off. If you're in the middle of the airplane, it might take you 10 minutes to get off the airplane, but it's still not 20 minutes, the time that it takes to get everyone off. So, I'm not sure if anyone on this particular call is impacted by this second point, and you are able to get off under your own power. But yeah, just what do we think these time constraints should be on the delivery of assistance? And then also, if we agree that, for those of us who use wheelchairs, we should be able to have that assistance immediately upon, the last passenger getting off. That's also something that we should send to the DOT and say, yes, we agree that this is a standard that should be, implemented into regulation and made part of the law. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to share here?
I mean, things vary. I mean, I have a manual wheelchair, and there's variations. I can tell you that generally my wheelchair tends to be promptly at some point. Doesn't take very long. But if you have a power chair or perhaps a scooter, that's where things get a little more complicated. And because I don't have that experience, I don't speak to it. But as a manual wheelchair user, I haven't really come across that problem. The problem is that you brought up a point when they talk to you, there's no safety briefing prior to, they don't talk to you. And then lo and behold, when you're the last one out and the crew cannot leave because until the last passenger leaves, they seem to want to talk to you. Hell yeah, is this your last stop? Is this where you go? And I said, wow, the whole flight, you didn't speak to me. And that's customer service. So everything we're asking for, I've been hearing this conversation since the beginning. It's consistency. I've traveled the last 3 weeks internationally and domestically. There's such inconsistencies. And as much as some of you are suggesting that to ask the question, how can I assist you? That's what they're taught. They're taught. I'm in food service industry. So when we have customers coming in, whether it's a restaurant, catering, we observe, we lay out the situation, we lay out the tables. And it's all about preparation. I just find these people running from place to place, and every disability is different. So let's take that into account as well, as I'm a double amputee, but another double amputee may have a different way of transfer perhaps and whatnot. It's a lot, but I think the key question is, They just have to be consistent and ask the question, how can I assist you? I had one gentleman just say, well, my grandmother's in a wheelchair. I know what to do. I said, yeah, but the way you're grabbing my chair, you're about to break a $20,000 chair. I don't care what you're, I mean, I wouldn't even grab your grandmother's chair because I would ask her first. So a lot of those situations are more to do with staffing, training, but there's a lot of young people there. There are a lot of people who've only been around 6 months, and there's just a ton of inconsistencies. And I was a little disappointed to see that how much there is this, because it was very rare to hear someone actually, as I boarded, to say, welcome. Is there something on the plane? That rarely happens. That's customer service. So you're gonna, it's a nature of people, unfortunately. But I don't know if we could put in the rule. How do you put that in the rule? Say good morning. Say hello.
Yeah, Constantine, I think one of the funniest and most shocking things that happens to me is upon arrival on the last one on board, and a flight attendant comes up from the back and says, it's time to go. Are you gonna get
Yes,
off?
it happened to, yes. What are you waiting for?
Like, well, maybe the safety, maybe the flight attendants didn't have their briefing amongst themselves about the passengers who were on board. I mean, I think, if we had just crashed, I might be totally out of luck here.
Right.
Terrifying.
And another thing, and John, if I may add, as much as I keep telling the crew, yes, it's a service provider that is a third party that was hired by the airline, but yet as a crew, you have another set of eyes. If you see someone going backwards, you stop them. If you don't see they need to work together. It's almost like they say, well, that's a service provider. That's not my job. Well, no. If something happens, it's not the service provider's issues, it's the airline's issues, even though they were contracted out. So that's a continuous thing. As a service provider, they come in, did it wrong, but how about the people themselves, who the crew members should be able to identify and say, you know what, there's an issue, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. And I think for a long time, I think it's gotten a little better now, but airlines routinely try to use their contractor as a scapegoat to suggest that, well, it wasn't us who did this, it was our contractor, or a third party prospect, or bags, or whoever the given assistance provider is. But that's a really good point, in that not only do we need to create consistency across the experience, but I think that the contractors themselves maybe are not trained enough in, well, they very much see themselves as separate from the airline, and the airline very much sees them as separate from the airline. They don't work in concert all that often.
Right.
I was just thinking the other day how it would be so nice if the contractors themselves, the assistance team is there, waiting to get me off the airplane, but my wheelchair is nowhere to be found, and a gate agent hasn't come down to speak to me. No one really is there sticking up for me. I'm alone, unable to move, being encouraged to get off the airplane as quickly as possible because the flight crew wants to go. The assistance contractors have another gate that they need to get to help someone out. And so, yeah, I get really frustrated that, yeah, there's really there's no teamwork at play between the various entities that are trying to deliver transportation service collectively. And that's really frustrating.
And I don't want to stretch this, but this element of dignified, you go from being dignified, taken into the plane, and then all of a sudden the service provider doesn't know where the button is for the armrest and decides, we're going to carry you over. And I said, before you do that, can we ask the flight attendant where the button is? And sure enough, the flight attendant comes over, pops the button, and the armrest went up. So they were willing to carry me over without even asking the crew. And I said, no, that's the crew. So there are elements of training that needs to be talked about. Anyways, I don't want to take much of your time, but thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Constantine. Thank you.
Hi,
Pamela.
this is Ann. If I could speak,
Oh,
this is
yes.
Ann Walker. Ann
Yes,
Walker
Ann.
from South Carolina. I've been on a scooter for about 10 years. A guy tried to rob me about 22 years ago. My right ankle got messed up, but I can walk a little bit with canes, but I have an electric scooter, and generally speaking, I'm the last one off, because, in other words, I'm usually off after all the wheelchair people. And I don't think, and there was a question earlier about those of us that can, walk and a little bit should get off first. I, I, I don't agree with that, because I think, I mean, my heart goes out to anybody who can't walk at all. I can walk a little bit. So, but for me personally, I fly Delta. My last trip, just a week or so ago, the pilot actually helped with my scooter. And so I've only had so far, I mean, I do a good bit of traveling, but I only fly Delta, and they've, so far for me, even though I have to talk myself down, because years ago when I could run on and off airplanes, I was, might be the last one on, but the first one off, whatever it might be. And that's not the case anymore, obviously. And so I just have to talk to myself down and be cool and wait for him to bring my scooter, and we go from there. But I mean, there's always and y'all know there are people that are always going to be nice, and there are people that are always going to be jerks. So we just have to figure out how to deal with all those kinds. But it can be, travel can be frustrating when folks don't cooperate with you.
I appreciate your comments, and certainly understand. I think the second question up here is really the DOT asking if they should set a right for people who would like to get off first to be able to do that, who are able to get off without the aisle chair. Certainly not a mandate. You can get off the plane when you want. Just like I tell people, you've got a right to pre-board the airplane and get on first, but you can get on last if you want. That is absolutely also a right that you have. You can't be forced to take advantage of any rights that you're given. They're there to make the travel experience easier for you, but if they don't, or you have another desire, maybe you'd like to get a snack on your layover, and you're not going to get there to board first, that's fine. Totally up to you. But certainly appreciate that perspective. I see two more hands up, Pamela and then Rowan.
Yeah, this is Pam. I'm waiting so long, I forgot what I was going to say. I do think the inconsistency is terrible, and that hopefully the training will help with that. I think it's important to print out the rules when you're traveling. So for instance, if you've got a manual chair like I do and you want to put it in the closet, whip out the rule that says I'm allowed to do that. I have a right to do that, because the flight attendants don't know that rule. They'll argue with you. They'll say no, so it's a good practice to bring the rules with you. And I wish they would laminate them and put them around the airport, so that people, because part of the reason we don't get what we want is because we don't know what we're entitled to. We're afraid to ask. But and it's upon ourselves to get educated about that. But it's good to have something in writing that you can whip out in case there's an argument.
Yeah, that's a great point, and sort of coming off what I was saying earlier about maybe the assistant staff could be an advocate for us as well. It'd be nice if they knew that you have a right to store your manual wheelchair in the closet on board, and if the flight attendants are giving you a hard time, maybe they say, well, with all due respect, this is a right they have, this passenger has, and she wishes to store her wheelchair here, you're going to need to move your bags.
You know what else? And I think this might be in the works, but I when I flew back from Europe couple of months ago, I didn't know where my wheelchair went, and that's always the case. They pick me up, put me in the aisle seat, and then that's say goodbye to the wheelchair. You know, you give them instructions, but you have no idea if they're following your instructions. And my chair does fold, and I can put it in the closet. And I asked them to do that, and they look stunned. They don't know what I'm talking about. And then next thing I know, I'm in the back of the plane. I have no idea where my wheelchair is. And I asked a few flight attendants as they were walking by to please confirm that the wheelchair is in the front of the plane. And they said, okay, we'll find out and let you know. Well, they never, ever let you know. I mean, they forget that you asked them the question. And I would love to see that written in the rules too, that they will, you know, confirm with you where your chair is, that it's on the plane, or it's in the closet if you've asked it to be in the closet, or it's not in the closet. And it's, you know, they couldn't, whatever it is, just to let you know. And it should be someone's responsibility on that flight to let you know. So that's, I hope they'll do
Yeah,
that.
no, that's a great point. And there actually is later on, and we're gonna, the DOT is asking specifically about that. If you should,
Yeah.
if passengers should be notified when their chair is loaded. I hadn't considered, as I was thinking through that you might also want to know where it's stored on board the aircraft, if that's what you've requested, in the passenger cabin, rather than you know, just for wheelchairs that are stored in the
And
cargo
I
hold.
think the person who's talking to you, like the flight attendant said to me, oh, I'll go check. And, you know, all she's going to do is go ask somebody and they're going to say, yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not a confirmation. I want someone to say, yes, I've seen the chair. It's in the closet. It's safe. Or it's not in the closet, whatever it is, you know, tell the truth about where the
I-
chair is.
I appreciate that. No, thank you. That's really valuable. Who's up next? Yes, please go ahead.
So, a friend of mine about 25, maybe even 30 years ago, was a trainer for the airlines on helping disabled passengers. And they let all their trainers go because it's cheaper to pay penalties than to keep everybody trained, which I think is appalling and unproductive. So the thing I wanted to actually say was my last few trips, they've totally lost my chair. And 2 years ago, an airline totally destroyed my chair. And they have now bought me a chair that doesn't fit on airplanes. And the only carrier I have found is United. You can put the dimensions of your chair in, it will tell you which airplanes it will fit in, and then you can search for flights on those planes. But the chair that they bought me, that they replaced my well, I mean, it was perfectly good before they destroyed it, chair with one that's too big to fly. There are many airports in the US that don't have planes big enough for my airline provided chair to travel to. I had to take Amtrak down the East Coast a couple years ago because the destination did not have planes big enough for this gigantic chair. I mean, and yes, I need a complex rehab chair, but do I need a 500+ pound complex rehab chair? I don't think so.
So I would love for you to send me an email, because I'd like to learn more about that. I mean, you know, carriers should be replacing with the same or better chair, but you know, they should really try to get you an exact copy of what you had. So definitely curious about how all that transpired, because I really do think there's an interesting story there. Certainly some experiences I've had recently, replacements were not same model, different year. Just some challenges I've had with some replacement chairs that I've had recently, and I've been stewing on how to go about talking about that. And I'd love to hear more about your experience. So please, if you're willing, send me an email.
I will.
David.
Sorry, it took me a minute there to unmute.
No worries.
Just, the observation, I think this is a wonderful, forum again, and I really think you really articulate so many great things in your writings and everything you do. But, I'm a quadriplegic, and so I see the world from that perspective with a huge electric wheelchair. That's my lifeline. And if I sit, and I'm going, when I travel, it's hard enough. And there's a million contingencies. And if something goes wrong, it can be a disaster. But anyway, I'm sympathetic. I would want everybody that's on this forum to have a great flight. More, if I could figure out a way to do it. But after I had my disastrous trip recently, I reached out to Delta and I said, well, why don't I set up an account where I can, say what my wheelchair specifications are, that I need an armrest that goes down, that so next time, I don't, hold the airplane up for an hour and then you make an announcement that the wheelchair caused an hour delay. So people groaning at me. But and a way that passengers could get more involved and become with more expertise, knowing a little bit more about aircraft, knowing about, like I was mentioning earlier, some of the technology to get on and off the aircraft. I mean, I think there's lots of ways to make improvements on the aisle chair, and offering a number of options for people, and because my solution, what I need isn't necessarily we're going to help Pam out or other individuals. So, but I think I wish there was a mechanism where we could maybe get preferred status if we have an account, or just a more significant role in travel.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of interest from passengers in being able to save requests so that you don't have to engage in this sort of repetitive process of asking for the same things over and over again and then clarifying. One thing that I said that American Airlines was doing really well is that when you made an assistance request for your flight, they would give you a call to see if you had any questions, to get more information about your wheelchair, any particular needs that you had. I liked that the first few times, but there are some days where I'm booking 3 or 4 flights and then I get 3 or 4 calls. And so I've stopped requesting assistance in advance. I didn't really see much of a difference in my experience. I mean, I still encourage people always to request assistance in advance. At the very least, it can sometimes make things easier when you're checking in at the airport if stuff is already loaded into your record about the things that you need. But I personally, I stopped requesting assistance in advance. Someone at the airline has gotten, I appreciate that they do this. They've been putting the requests into my record automatically. So, I get to avoid having that phone call, where I say, yep, I've been through this 100 times before. Great to talk to you again. But I think one of the reasons that airlines are not moving forward with allowing people to save information is because there are a lot of concerns around HIPAA and your protected medical information.
Yep. Yeah.
I'd like to be able to sign a waiver and say, yeah, you can tell people that I use a wheelchair. The DOT is actually has announced within the last week that they actually are looking into some privacy concerns about information that airlines are sharing with unauthorized third parties, potentially, information, being put out into the ether in improper ways. And I have a feeling that disability information is going to be part of that. Haven't been able to get those answers just yet about the full scope of this and, where the investigation maybe is heading, but it is sort of an industry-wide investigation that will involve a lot of different air carriers. And I am curious if, some airlines have started allowing you to save, if you have a service animal, save sort of your application to bring that service animal. I'm very curious if that may be implicated, because there is a third party running that service and sharing it with airlines and back and forth. So, I'm curious, but certainly from my perspective, it would be a lot easier if I could just save information. And one example where that is kind of possible is with Amtrak. So Amtrak knows when I log in to my account and I check the button for assistance, it has saved the fact that I'm bringing a power wheelchair and need the wheelchair space on board, and that I don't need any additional assistance, such as a wheelchair, an Amtrak wheelchair at the station. And that makes logging in, to my account and booking a ticket a lot easier than it otherwise would be if I had to click through this web of options every time I wanted to book a ticket. But I'm just not sure, I'm not sure that something like that is going to be regulated from the DOT perspective. I'd also like to say we're on point 2 of 8, and a long time into this call. So what I've realized is that obviously there's a lot that people want to talk about on these topics. There definitely is going to be a part 2 of this, probably next week. So I'll work on putting that together. I'd like to, if we could get through 3 and 4, and see where we're at. But I know that, certainly want to respect everyone's time. And I didn't schedule 3 hours for this conversation tonight. So, would certainly, like to move forward to, point 3. And this is sort of where we're getting into damage. We may not get through these because I know that a lot of folks here on the call have had experiences with wheelchair damage. But I think that these 2 things, 3 and 4, and maybe 5, are really going to get into some important questions of what should airlines' responsibility be, and then also what should the DOT's responsibility be in disincentivizing damage to wheelchairs. I mean, that really is the problem here. I think what we've learned over the last few years in particular, when we've had a lot of data on the number of wheelchairs that are getting damaged, that the cost of repairing and replacing damaged wheelchairs has not been incentive enough for airlines to fix the problem, because we've seen sort of the same percentage of wheelchairs damaged, roughly. I think this year might be a little down from last year, but the year isn't over yet. So basically, point 3 sort of says what we have known for a while. There was one in addition here, in an expansion of the definition of a mishandled wheelchair to include a stolen one, which that is wild. But I had heard of a story maybe a year or 2 ago of a passenger's wheelchair legitimately being stolen from the airport. Kind of wild. So yeah, that would be mishandled. That's now included in part of this updated proposed rule. But the big change here is that the DOT is going to say that if your wheelchair is mishandled in one of these ways, lost, delayed, damaged, or stolen while it's in the custody of the airline, that is going to be a per se violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, which effectively means that it's an automatic violation. There's not going to be a defense to the negligence of a mishandled wheelchair. Whereas if you submitted a complaint in the past, the airline might be able to point to an extenuating circumstance. Whereas moving forward, if it's returned in a way that is different from the way that it was handed over, it's just plain and simple a violation. And so really the questions that are arising out of this from the DOT's perspective is it reasonable to say, yet, it's an automatic violation of the rule? I think it is. I think we should all say that it is. There really isn't a defense. Sure, accidents happen, but even on occasions when my wheelchair has been damaged badly due to an accident, and I didn't personally say, "Oh, you're a terrible person for doing this to me," something happened that shouldn't have happened, and it was certainly preventable. So I'm going to, in my commentary, I'm going to say yes, that a per se violation is an adequate approach. But then the DOT is also asking us to comment on, whether or not the definition of mishandling is appropriate. I think that's, I expect most of us to be in agreement with yes. I will certainly be telling the DOT that we need to stick to the current understanding that if it's returned in a state that is different from the way in which we handed it over, that is mishandling, just in emphasizing that point so that in the writing of the new regulation, we don't lose that understanding. But I also think that we should be submitting comments. This won't end up in any regulation, but we should be submitting comments to the DOT that the lack of enforcement of this entire rule, the entirety of the Air Carrier Access Act, is really unacceptable. We've not seen a lot in the way of DOT exercising its authority over the years. In fact, one of the first articles I wrote on the website, I looked back at sort of the enforcement that DOT had done, and every time they had fined an airline for disability rights violations, it coincided with some major news story that got national press about that particular airline mistreating a particular passenger. And so it seemed to me that the DOT was only taking action when they were forced to by the news media, rather than, understanding that we've got a responsibility to actually uphold the civil rights of people. So I'm just going to ask really quickly, are there any comments on these particular questions? And if you want to talk about damage to wheelchairs specifically, the next point where we're talking about the repairing and replacing them might be a more appropriate spot for that. But happy to, if anything is on your mind at this particular moment, happy to listen in. Okay. So let's move on to, oh gosh, I forgot that this was for, but we actually have already addressed this before. Should airlines notify passengers if their wheelchair has been loaded or unloaded? And what should the extent of that notification be? When I load a wheelchair, and this is true with a couple of airlines, American for sure. I think Delta's wheelchair tag shows in the baggage that is loaded. If I'm wrong on that, I apologize. Then maybe it was United, but one of the two. But basically, my wheelchair, I can pull it off right here. Here is a baggage tag. Sorry for the blur, but the airline puts this baggage tag on my wheelchair and they scan it in when they load. And if I go into the mobile application on the phone, American Airlines, it will show me that the chair has been loaded or unloaded. So I think that technology probably is already going to satisfy the base requirement that the DOT is proposing. However, what they are also asking is, should the information and updates that passengers receive be more specific? Should they tell you that it's in the forward cargo bin, or the rear cargo bin, or in the onboard wheelchair closet? And I think that, from what we've heard earlier, I'm not sure, was that Pam that told us that, Pam or Ann, I think. But I certainly think that is really important. We can get more specific with that information. I think rather than just, sometimes I'll see my wheelchair gets scanned in before it's on the plane and it's still out of the cargo hold for 10 more minutes. And I'm like, well, gosh, I hope they don't forget. So, maybe we do need to be more specific in the information that passengers are receiving. Couple of other questions that I think are also very important is, should airlines be required to provide the dimensions of the cargo door? Obviously, yes. I think it's still ridiculous that not every airline is doing that, and that the DOT is even asking this question. Obviously, yes. And then if you have a wheelchair that isn't going to fit on a particular aircraft, what airline or what alternatives should the airline be required to provide? And there's certainly been a lot of discussion about this recently. I thought something that was really interesting coming out of Canada, which the decision is being appealed right now. But there had been a requirement instituted that would, I believe, take effect at the end of this year, would require Air Canada to bring a bigger airplane if your wheelchair wasn't going to fit. And, I think probably that's not going to happen here in the US. More power to you if you make that recommendation to the DOT. Certainly not going to stand against that suggestion, but I just don't think it's realistic. DOT treats regulation in this space with kid gloves, I think, in trying to protect the interest of carriers, maybe more so than passengers. But I'd love to hear maybe other alternatives that you think would be appropriate. And I see Mark, is it Caitlin? I'm sorry.
It's okay, John. It's Kimberly.
Kimberly. Oh gosh,
Kimberly.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Actually, just a quick comment on the tags that you were talking about checking in. We've used Apple AirTags before, and you just drop them in the pouch and you can track it personally, and it doesn't matter what the airlines zap in or not. Our daughter and some friends had bought some Scottish whiskey, I guess it was. Anyway, some sort of alcohol product they were bringing back, and they put the AirTags in there, and the airlines were saying that they were loaded on the plane. And she says, no, they're not. I can see right here. And she says, no, that we've got the tags on there. They just don't update the tags right away. She said, no, I've got the Apple AirTags. I have my own tag, and it's not on the plane. And they didn't load the plane, and it got clear to San Francisco, and the alcohol was still in Texas or wherever. So that's one way that you can keep track of your own stuff, and it goes anywhere. So even when they were in San Francisco, they could see where their alcohol was being tracked and how long it took to get to them. So it's something that you can control yourself and not worry about the airlines. And I'm sure that Android has them too, but I know for sure that Apple does. So they're called luggage tags.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, the Apple AirTag. I think I wrote about that a while ago, but I'll throw that in maybe the next newsletter to remind folks. Definitely important to put that not only in your luggage, but hide it in your wheelchair as well. Or don't hide it. You can put it openly out there. The FAA has said that AirTags are permitted even though they're battery operated in checked luggage. So
right, because they're low frequency,
certainly acceptable.
Yeah.
definitely.
So John, are you asking the question, assuming that the dimensions of the, cargo area are not listed?
So, yeah,
Yes.
my expectation is that DOT is going to say, yes, airlines need to provide this information. The question will be at where do they provide it? Some airlines have already for a little while had lists of cargo door dimensions on their website, but they're hidden away and hard to find. United has committed to providing, and this is part of a negotiated settlement with DOT, has committed to providing that information in the booking channel. So as you're booking and comparing flights, you can see, well, will my wheelchair fit on this airplane? No. So maybe I need to look at another. They've also committed to reimbursing fare difference if, your wheelchair won't fit on a 737, but it will fit on the Airbus A320. Then, if that A320 flight is more expensive, they will refund you the difference. So, that is potentially what an alternative can look like. Probably the most realistic to get regulated. I have had maybe some concerns about fronting an airline money in that situation. If the flight is $200 more and you're booking a flight that's months into the future, well, United is planning to hold on to that 200 until you've actually flown, at which time, you can request the refund of the difference. Understand why it's easier for them to set it up like that. But it's not so great for the passenger, in my opinion. But yes, I think this is under the assumption that airlines most likely are going to be required to provide information. I think the real question is where they provide it. And so my suggestion will be in the booking channel. So as you're comparing flights, you can compare cargo dimensions. I will be sad maybe to lose the traffic on my cargo dimensions list on wheelchairtravel.org, but ultimately this is what I've been advocating for a long time, is that, why am I the one providing this information? Why aren't you guys doing it? And it's not just cargo door dimensions that airlines should be providing. I think it's crazy that, carriers are just not providing much information at all about what the air travel experience looks like if you're a wheelchair user, or if you're blind, any number of disabilities that you might have. It'd be nice if they, shared a little bit with passengers about what they could expect their experience to be like.
You mean like a sort of a boilerplate thing, that lists the 7 different types of airplanes and what the dimensions are, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think what United, and I haven't checked to see if this is live, but I think it might be. When you're searching for flights, you've got a list. You can sort them based on how big your wheelchair is and will it fit or not on the airplane. I think that would be really valuable for people to have at every airline, whether they're booking with Spirit Airlines or United. The same concerns are at play. I think maybe a real challenge would be if you're booking on Southwest Airlines, for example, which is a very popular airline among members of the community. They only operate the Boeing 737. And so, that is one of the problematic types of airplanes for fitting a large power wheelchair on board. What sort of alternative could Southwest be compelled to provide? Would they need to then accommodate you on another airline? So I think that these are some of the questions that DOT is going to be debating in terms of how narrowly they construe a regulation or how broadly they do.
I think, I think it would be a good idea to, when you're booking online, to have it at the top. I don't know how much space it would take up on the website, but put whatever planes you fly with that airline and just put the dimensions up there. And then if someone gets to the airport and realizes that their wheelchair won't fit, then the airlines can say, well, it's not our problem, it's your problem. It was right sent and, right front and center. But remember that there are a lot of people who fly still who are not savvy with computers, and they don't even book with computers. They make a phone call. So it's important that, first of all, they don't bury the information, obviously, but also I think that the people up front, the live people who are talking to people on the phone, need to have some kind of sheet in front of them. So if a passenger says, well, my wheelchair fit, they don't direct you to the website, that they can just, say, well, this is the amount of space you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think providing the information, and this really is the question of, okay, we provided the information, but you turn up at
If
the
they're, if
airport
they
and still
provide
have a
the
need.
yeah, if they provide the wheelchair, the information, and it's clear, and you don't have to dig around for it, then I don't think they need to be liable. As long as it's really out there and people are gonna find it.
But sometimes planes do get changed as well.
Yeah,
They-
but they're gonna have every single plane.
Right, but what
Right.
my success has been with American Airlines, United Airlines, the accessibility desk. There's an 800 number accessibility desk. These people are thorough. They know their stuff. It's all about, they'll even get better seats for you.
But who
they'll walk
knows
you-
about that number?
Well, this is why we're doing this part. I think that people need to get aware, get with it. We gotta get accessibility desk, CROs.
Yeah.
Part of that stuff, when we go to, I'm involved with the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, we tell travelers accessibility desk. I mean, it's just a matter of training. Someone had taught me how to do certain things. It didn't just happen. But it's online too. And finally in the magazines, if the ones that the airlines that still have them, now they're starting to add the different departments, including the accessibility desk, in their magazines. So they're starting to promote something that's wonderful, actually.
I think what they should do is if someone has a disability and buys a ticket, and, is at the airport, the person on the other side should hand them a list of regulations. It should be all laminated, easy to read, bullet points, so that it's helpful to get the general public, on board. So
Yeah, Pam, I think, airlines for a while have been required to provide a copy of the Air Carrier Access Act upon request. The problem is that by being here tonight, you're part of the minority of people that know that the Air Carrier Access Act exists. And so, yeah, I certainly understand, the idea of being forthcoming, that, sort of like when I check into a nice hotel, maybe they have a suite of services that are available to me, and they hand over a paper or a booklet that says, these are the services that we offer. This is what you can take advantage of while you're staying with us. It would be nice if an airline or any business handed over a list of my civil rights, but I'm not sure how realistic.
it would make their jobs easier too, though.
My experience has been recently with the accessibility desks. They're asking the weight of my chair. They're asking me the size of my chair. In most airlines now, they also have travel tips, because they want, look, they certainly, they understand a satisfied customer is going to come back. And they're in the business to also sell airline tickets. So they're starting to put more information online. And you're right, when it comes to people not as savvy, that's why even if I book online, I'm still calling the 800 number accessibility. I just like going over the details. That's just me.
You know, I've never known about that line. How did you find out about it? I mean, did they advertise the telephone number?
Well, you know what? They're advertising it more in the magazines, they're advertising it online, they're advertising it in everything. But you have an opportunity like today. John's providing this platform. You know, there's an accessibility desk, 800 number. American has it, United, and the people are very pleasant. The people that work in these departments, they love working in these departments. Some chose to work in these departments for the fact they provide help. There's not some guy in some offshore country. We're talking people who legitimately care about people with disabilities. That's my experience that it's been with the accessibility desk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is actually a list of these numbers on the website. If you go into the air travel guide on my website, I think it's the first how to book airline tickets and request assistance. There's a list of more than 100 carriers and the numbers to their accessibility hotlines. Some, of course, are more robust and capable than others. You know, I think the U.S. airlines are getting it down pretty well. And like I said earlier, you know, when some carriers, including American, when you make a request for assistance online, they should be calling you, you know, before your flight to go over some of this information with you.
I've never gotten a phone call, not once.
Okay, that's interesting. They have been very proactive with me. That's why I said I stopped making the requests in advance, because I didn't want to get the constant calls. But you know, yeah, there is a list on wheelchairtravel.org. Go to information air travel and where to request assistance. I see Eileen here has her hand raised, so love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. Couple of things. I learned about the accessibility line from you on your website, so thank you for that.
Awesome.
And I just and I've used it, and I agree that the accessibility personnel are very helpful. And I've flown on Delta, and I've flown on American Airlines, and I'm just getting into travel more. And for the American Airlines, I have a mobility number, and so that will probably follow me. I just want to also mention that the former, I'm from Rhode Island, and my former congressman was Jim Langevin, who is who was the only disabled congressman. And I met his mother at a fundraiser, and his power chair was damaged. And he also famously wrote about being kept off a Lufthansa airline because one clerk objected to his battery. And he said, if that can happen to me on a congressional program overseas, it can happen to anybody. So he's an automatic advocate. And I would just mention maybe getting in touch with him now. He's on the faculty of Rhode Island College at the moment.
Yes, I was sad when he retired from Congress.
So was I. But
right as I was moving to the area, actually.
Well, he's still in the area, so, and he's national and would be very helpful. Thank you. But thank you for your information, which has gotten me more comfortable about traveling again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Eileen. It's wonderful to have you here. I think that we probably are coming up to a point now on time that I should say, let's not get into the remaining 4 questions tonight. I will host another one of these. We have some big outstanding topics. I'll cycle through them really quick. These, of course, are all included in the primer that is on the website. Talking about number 5 is the return of delayed wheelchairs or scooters, which we hope doesn't happen, but amazingly, it's happened to me, I think a few times now, and I had survived maybe 5 years of never being disconnected from my wheelchair. Now, I had some that were destroyed, but they always traveled with me. And the last 3 or 4 years, it's been seeming to happen about once a year that an airline leaves my wheelchair behind. Number 6 is going to be a really big topic, sort of uncovering and diving into the repair and replacement of damaged or destroyed wheelchairs. This particular question, I'll probably be writing about 5 pages of public comment on, because I think that there need to be some tremendous changes in the way these things are handled. I've got, yeah, I've just had a doozy of a year with repairing my wheelchairs. Right to receive a loaner wheelchair, and I think what is going to be really big about this is the DOT maybe wants to provide a little more specificity about what is an appropriate loaner wheelchair. I commented, I think in the primer article about how, I use a complex Permobile, formerly Quantum power wheelchair with tilt and recline and all that. And one time a loaner wheelchair that I got was a 3-wheeled scooter. So, that is not, it doesn't allow me the same level of freedom. And so really, what should airlines be required to do, and how can this be accomplished? Something just very briefly that I've thought of for a while is that every airline at every airport should sort of have a stable of wheelchairs to loan out in the event that, one is damaged. Seems like the airlines maintaining that themselves and having that on site at the airport would save a heck of a lot of money. There's some data that the DOT had collected about the cost to an airline of providing, loaner wheelchairs. And sometimes, depending on the length of time, it can be thousands of dollars to rent and borrow a wheelchair, plus the transportation costs. So, I think that there is some information that we can provide. DOT also wants to know that, if you're stuck at home because you got a loaner wheelchair that isn't equivalent to what you had, and is actually dangerous for you to use, should the airline be compensating you for your lost time, whether that be, work or travel, or any other activities, and what should that compensation look like? I would love to hear your opinion on that. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit before, but training for staff that are providing assistance, and then also staff who are loading and unloading your wheelchair from the cargo hold. What should this look like? How frequent should it be? And I really think that, they're going to make it more frequent. That pretty much is clear from the NPRM. But what we don't have a whole lot of clarity on is what should be included in the training and who should be giving it. There are some companies that have been providing wheelchair training on handling. It hasn't improved things, as we see in the data, and the data is not lying to us. And then also training that's provided to airline staff. Some airlines are creating this internally. Some airlines are bringing third parties to do this. But what we don't have as consumers is what exactly was the person who's helping us trained on? And what were they told to do? And so I think that all of that should be disclosed. If I'm going to the hospital, and getting work done, I know the type of training that my doctor went through. I know the type of training that the CNAs went through who lift me, into the bed or onto the operating table. Like, we have some visibility into the type of education and training that people providing a whole range of services provide. There are requirements for licensure, but there is not that same level requirement for the people who are lifting us in and out of our wheelchairs, who are loading our wheelchairs on and off the airplane. And, you know, given the tremendous impact that this has on our lives, you know, I think maybe there should be, you know, a little more transparency, perhaps clearer standards that carriers should have to abide by. You know, when somebody who is painting the walls in my home requires more licensing than, you know, the person lifting me up and down, that doesn't seem right to me. I'm not suggesting that we need to create a wheelchair handling license maintained by the federal government, but we should at least have some greater insight into the types of training that people are getting. Because if I know what this person is taught to do, then I'll know whether or not I want them to do what they've been taught, or if I need to instruct them on something different. So that's a perspective that I have. I would like to discuss all of these points 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let's say next week. I'm not sure what day it will be, but just because I'm going to the solar eclipse next week, and then the following week isn't good because I'm going to London, and also some secret other place in Europe that I will share next week after Easter. Waiting to put everything together, but I know it's a destination that many of you will want to be reading about, and I'm excited to share it. I guess you know, we've been on for an hour and 40 minutes. I'm planning to close this chat up here in the next few minutes, but if anyone has any last words they want to share, happy to hear them. But on the first 4 you know, topics that we've talked about, obviously we started with talking about what does it mean for assistance to be safe and dignified. How quickly should assistance be provided on arrival? Whether or not wheelchair damage should be considered an automatic violation, and whether or not the definition of a mishandled device is appropriate. And then finally, whether or not we should be notifying passengers of whether or not their wheelchair has been loaded, or where it is in the handling process. And of course, we've got points 5, 6, 7, and 8 still ahead to discuss next week. So yeah, any final thoughts on what we've discussed so far this evening? Okay. Let me actually run through the chat because I see there are new messages. Thank you to everyone who has commented. Really appreciate everyone who had conversations tonight. Some airlines, the known traveler number. Yeah, this is a great question that came actually a while ago. I think we talked a little bit about it, about airlines saving assistance requests. I really do think that they're concerned about privacy, and, you know, being hacked and data stolen. I really do think that's why this hasn't happened. I'll be curious to see how the current investigation into passenger information privacy that the DOT is undertaking, what the results and findings of that are, and how maybe that could impact the types of information that airlines are collecting and storing. But yeah, and I think I'm actually, I was already planning to take a deeper look at the privacy investigation in a future article. I just need to get someone from DOT to talk to me about what's actually going on over there. It's gonna happen, don't worry. Yeah, well, thank you everyone for joining this evening. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all the best in this holiday weekend. If you do celebrate Easter, all the best to you during the remainder of this Holy Week. And I will be sending out an email with a couple more articles on Saturday. And in that email, I'll be announcing the date and time of part 2 of this conversation. My expectation is that it will be on the 6th of April. That's my expectation, but obviously look forward to having you all join in part 2. Of course, information in the primer article is provided on how to submit comments to the DOT. So if you're already ready to do that, go ahead. You're free to do that, and you're not limited to a single comment. So if you want to go in again and comment some more, you're free to do that. I'll be providing more detail on that in part 2 of the conversation. Thanks again for all of your contributions. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next week. Take care.